Astroworld Music Festival, a tragedy seared into Houston's collective memory. The chaos.
There definitely was a surge, and it was pushing and shoving.
Everybody was just surging. People were pushing up on each other.
People were in panic. It was just like some people trying to get in, people trying to get out.
It was like getting packed like sardines.
He didn't think he was going to make it, and he thought he just instantly started praying.
The missteps.
Well, they didn't stop the show for like the whole set. They stopped it for a brief second.
The show continued after that.
Yes.
The loss of life.
We lost our brother. We're grieving for all the families that lost their loved ones in this horrendous event.
And then promises for accountability.
My job as a chief of police is to make sure that we find out what happened.
The families of those who died and everybody affected deserve answers.
This incident is being thoroughly investigated and reviewed. Thoroughly.
But 1 year later, there are more questions than answers.
It's my understanding the investigation's still not done with Astroworld.
The one thing we did feel we were missing was the Stop Show Authority.
It's not about what goes right at an event that you want to plan for. It's what could potentially go wrong. And how do you mitigate that risk?
Our KPRC 2 Investigates team never stopped digging, and our work is far from over. It continues tonight with your help in Astroworld, the next chapter.
And by your help, we mean questions and concerns raised by you. We want you to join in on this discussion about the Astroworld tragedy. To do that, you just text the word Astroworld to 866-996-5772. That number's right on your screen. Again, it's 866-996-5772. 5772. You can ask us your questions about what went wrong, where the investigation stands now, or where the lawsuits stand, or anything else you may want to know about the tragedy. The KPRC 2 Investigates team is here right now. We'll be answering as many of your questions as we can throughout this live chat. I'm Amy Davis, here with my colleagues, Robert Arnold, Joel Eisenbaum, Mario Diaz. You guys spent a lot of time, along with our KPRC 2 Investigates team members, behind the scenes, digging and getting answers and asking the questions that needed to be asked, and some of them still need to be answered.
True. There's still a lot of questions that have not been answered, and a lot of that is because the investigation's not over. So our Public Information Act requests are still being denied on that level. We can't find out a lot from many of the families who were directly involved because of either non-disclosure agreements from lawsuit settlements and the gag order for those that are still involved in actively in the lawsuits.
Right. I'm still going back and forth with the fire chief just this morning. We're still going back and forth on points, trying to understand the legislation and the new mechanisms in place and what they really do.
And when we go back in time and we think about that evening, right, early morning hours, we get the call, we all show up. I don't think anybody here would have said to themselves, you know what, come December 2022, we'll still be asking questions over this. I think this was something that was so significant for the city. They were going to address this as quickly as possible to give the answers to the family, to the rest of the city, and to the nation, because obviously at the time it was one of the deadliest incidents we have seen at a concert in recent memory.
Yeah, and we recently released our documentary, Why We Did It, because of this tragedy. So we released the original documentary here on KPRC 2+. It was our live stream, Astroworld, The Countdown to Tragedy. But our work hasn't stopped, so now we're turning the page to the next chapter as the city and the county make changes to safety at large-scale events. And so, you know, we want to remember, and I know that the victims of this tragedy are what was on everybody's minds from the moment that some of our reporters, some of you made the scene that morning right after the concert.
And it's not just those who lost their lives. I mean, there are people who are suffering from injuries that they sustained. I remember a friend of my wife reached out to me on Facebook after our documentary aired, saying that she has a friend whose child was at this event, had surgery on their arm, may not regain full use of that arm.
Wow.
So it's in addition to that loss of life, there are people who are still suffering both physically and psychologically.
A lot of
trauma.
people psychologically.
Yes.
Just people who were there, I mean, are still thinking about it.
People we've spoken to that remember the experience. The one young student that we spoke to from Sam Houston State, who told us at the time that they had issues with breathing because they were impacted against the barrier right by the front of the stage. But, as we watch that open and we go back in time at the very beginning and we see all the people that we talked to from that morning and that day and we hear the comments made, I'm also reminded about the fact that I interviewed people, I'm sure you came across these people, yourself, Joel included, that didn't quite see it in terms of being that dangerous, or they didn't realize what was truly happening at the time.
Right.
Because it was such a massive scale event and this was such a concentrated incident, tragedy that took place, but yet people were oblivious.
I mean, remember that soundbite? We had it on our own air of the person who attended Astroworld, and then the next day, the reporter, and I'm sorry, I can't remember who it was, asked, well, how do you feel now that 10 people have died? Now that you know that?
Yes.
Didn't know.
The look on the face, oh my goodness. And I'll never forget, there were two things that were said to me that really will stick with me forever. One was an Instagram post by a young lady who survived, but I'll never forget her writing on her Instagram page, people were drowning in other people. That has stayed with me ever since that day. And then one of the young men who was involved, who was upstage or close to the center stage, said that even before Travis Scott came out, he was tired and he wanted to sit down, but he couldn't. The crowd was so tight before Travis Scott, the main event even happened, he couldn't even sit down. And this is a young kid who plays soccer, teenager, he's in good shape.
And we
Could
saw
be anybody's kid.
And we saw that young man in the parking lot there who said that they stopped the show for a little bit. And I remember it was a young man with his mother from Dallas. And she was grabbing her son out of the hotel, saying, we're heading up to Dallas right now. It was about 4:18 a.m. It's hard not to remember these things. It was around that time period. And I said, why are you leaving right now? And she said, too much bad has happened here. I want to get home to where I feel safe. And then you see the next day, we had all of these comments and all these officials saying, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We need to get the answers. And here we are.
And here we
13.5
are.
months later.
So, I mean, 10 people died. A lot of people have mental and physical issues now so many months later. We want to remember those victims, and we were showing all the victims on our screen there. We've spoken with a large number of them in our documentary, but a lot of people, like you said, families can't talk because of settlements, or families just may not be ready. But while we were pursuing all of that, trying to get the stories of all of these people, the youngest victim, 9 years old, who died at the concert. While we're doing that, also pressing local leaders for answers. So Robert and Mario, I know that you both reported on this new agreement between the city and the county.
The interlocal.
Yes, aimed at addressing these large-scale events, because it seemed like that's what was missing. There was no sort of protocol or plan for a large gathering like this. Who's in charge? Who's responsible?
Well, I'll answer quickly, and I'll let Mario answer too. Two things that stood out to me. When we finally got the original memorandum of understanding of how the city and the county would work together at NRG, the original memorandum of understanding, the one that was in place 2018, didn't have anything to do at all with events. It dealt with building code, inspecting
really short,
buildings.
isn't it?
Yes, and it dealt with inspecting buildings. That was it. But then it specifically said that even though these are technically county buildings, when it comes to NRG, the city will be the one to inspect those. But that was really as far as it went. And then when you talked about, did we think we'd still be here asking some of these questions? I had an inkling of that a few days after, when there was this real question mark is, okay, who's got jurisdiction?
Right.
And that kept going back and forth.
What a mess that
So
was.
for people who didn't follow it from the beginning, basically NRG is owned by Harris County, but it sits within the city limits of Houston.
Correct.
So that is what seemed to cause confusion.
And there was no real legitimate agreement that had teeth to it. And this is why you had this new interlocal agreement that suddenly popped up in month 12, a year later, in late November, around mid-November, when they come together and said, we have an agreement in place now. Okay, we now understand how we're going to be addressing these kind of events in the future. We're going to have a big checkoff list. You got to remember, the big issue there also was that you didn't have that presence inside of the concert, the unified command center. You had the officials for the concert, everybody there was it, but you didn't have the law enforcement, the HFD, the people who they felt were needed.
A lot of them have been purposely excluded from the process.
You're right about that, Joel.
Well, but to give a quick rundown of this new interlocal, and this applies to NRG. Now, these large-scale events of 6,000 or more at NRG, it finally gives these clear delineations as to this is you, this is what you're responsible for, this is how this is going to work. to me, some of the biggest takeaways, and you can add to this, is the police chief now has to sign off on the security plan for a large event. The fire chief now has to sign off on the medical plan. They can also change the plan. They can reject the plan that's coming to them from a producer. The Harris County Fire Marshal's office is also now involved in the planning for these events from the very beginning. That didn't happen before.
Which takes us a long way away and makes some progress from where we were, which was basically the blame game. I mean, just to remind people, we can show you as part of our documentary about some of the things that we were hearing from local leaders. Let's listen.
Have any of the requisites changed for the city as a result of what took place with Astroworld for the large events?
You know, there's always room for improvement and tweaking. You know, we're looking.
But have any changed since?
Changed significantly, I would say. No.
But it is important to remember Astroworld was not on city property. It was city public safety that had to step in at the last moment, but that is not city property, and that was not a, so again, it's.
But the city had a hand in coordinating that event, council member, and I think that's what a lot of people are inquiring about, that the city has a hand.
Again, this is about looking at all the different opportunities, and we have a bite at the apple here where we can focus on what the city can control, and that's making sure that there are enough eyes and a proper plan in place ahead of time so that it's not a strain on safety.
That's great. And you heard Susan Christian there saying that's good. They were playing it very close to the vest, to the city officials. In that image that you just saw, you had the chief of HFD, Sam Pena. You had the chair of the Public Safety Committee, as well as Homeland Security for the City Council, City of Houston, and Abby Kamen. And you had Susan Christian. She is the woman in charge of putting on big events in the city of Houston. And you could tell, and that was, and let's be clear here, this was in October, mid-October that we're watching this committee hearing. And what they're addressing at that committee hearing had to do with events being held on private property. They wanted to create a new ordinance.
Right.
So if there was an event of over 500 people, a musical event in which public tickets were sold, or tickets were sold to the public, then you're going to have ordinances. You're going to have, permitting for these events. That was the new ordinance. But yet we still.
And that's separate from NRG.
Right. And that's why we were asking about Astroworld, because we still hadn't had anything concrete. And you could tell they were still going back and forth.
Still pretty astounding that in the city the size of Houston, we didn't have a plan in place that, and what we mean by all that, just so that people understand, if you're not used to, large events or you haven't thought about this. So if I'm going to have an event with more than 500 people, I have to go to some city or county and say, can I permit this? They say, tell me who's going to be there, who's going to show up. And then based on the information you provide, they say we need to have this many ambulances, this many police officers, and these agencies will be there.
But let's be very clear. That's for private land. They were making that decision for private land. So they had this
that was really to deal with a separate issue of where somebody would have a music festival and say maybe they invited a couple hundred people. Then you get an influencer that would get on Instagram or something and go, hey, I'm going to be here. And all of a sudden, boom, 1,000 people show up, and then it becomes this huge drain on resources.
Why do we need two separate rules or two separate? Why does it matter where it is? Why can't you always have the same response plan?
Because everybody will say that NRG is a unique thing.
What's unique about it?
Because
who owns it?
It's a county-owned property, but it resides within the city of Houston. And to go back to the jurisdictional question, that, from my understanding, was not really firmly answered until May of this year. So you have Astroworld, and that was based on emails that I obtained written by the Harris County Fire Marshal saying, hey, look, we got unfairly blamed for not handling some of this.
So we want
and
to
it
talk
finally
about
came
that.
out. That was in May. They finally answered that jurisdictional
10 seconds,
question.
Jamie. But to get back to your point about why is it different?
Why?
Well, private land sizes can be very different from what's established at NRG. Everybody's private property can be different. It's not the same exact. I hear where you're going with that, Joel, and there's some viability there.
Well, why would there be two sets of rules?
And that's the rules that they've put into place.
Also types of events,
for private
too.
events.
You're not going to have a Travis Scott level event on somebody's private piece of property.
I think the overarching theme
but it
here
could
was
be on some sort of private property.
Right, but I think the overarching theme here that we were asking the questions about there, and you saw the response we were getting, was that here we are in month 11 after Astroworld, and you're dealing with an ordinance that has to do with private land, but you're still not really addressing, which is, what is this? A new interlocal agreement that came out 3 weeks later.
And so, yes, so that's what we want to talk about. So, Robert, you recently obtained some emails between the city and the county, sort of as they were working on this agreement, and they clearly identified the jurisdiction in the months following the tragedy. One email noted that the county was essentially the landlord, but the city has public safety jurisdiction since it's within city limits.
Right. And when I sat down with the Harris County Fire Marshal, Lori Christensen, the one thing that she said is, she goes, look, I don't have ordinance-making authority.
Right.
I enforce government code, which means county commissioners come up with these codes. I enforce those codes. Period. The city is the one that comes up with ordinance. Since the NRG is within the city, it is therefore under the city's jurisdiction. And where it finally came out, according to an email written by Lori Christensen, that it wasn't until May of this year that the task force that had come together to study this had finally said, okay, yes, the city has jurisdiction when it comes to ordinance, when it comes to permitting and everything like that. That's why now the fire chief.
I mean,
and
so
the
this
police
had
chief have to
never
sign
been
off.
hashed out?
No, isn't that crazy?
No.
Let's listen to a little bit. I mean, what Susan Christensen actually said. We have some of that.
Where did the confusion really come from?
Well, historically, that's been a property that is very unique. What this new interlocal addresses is responsibility.
Now we can make sure our first responders know what that plan looks like ahead of time.
Okay, and that was a very important deal. And the reason that the fire marshal, Lori Christensen, was very clear on this point is her office got blamed, even by the governor's office, for not having proper permitting, not provide. She's like, we had zero authority out there. And the way I kind of got it is, the Texans took care of it, because you also got to remember, you have the Texans out there, you have the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. And so it's like, well, the Texans take care of the Texans events, the Livestock Show and Rodeo takes care of its event. And then there's all these other events, and we leave it up to the promoter, and we tell them, you have to follow these rules, you have to have these permits, and you have to do this. But then that question comes in, when that falls apart, who steps in? Well, hopefully this interlocal will now make sure that that happens.
But going into Astroworld, I mean, law enforcement that we spoke to, HPD members, said it was obvious that we were in charge. And that's what we heard from one former commander. We all took it as if we were in charge. Think about it. They had hundreds of officers there. The numbers have been tossed around, but you're looking at roughly 1/10 of the entire department, was there on the grounds that night and had been slated to be working the entire festival. Going in, they had meetings. This is what we heard from a former commander, that, hey, we're having this meeting to prepare for Astroworld. And then at the end of the day, everybody was like saying, well, we've got to identify exactly who really is in charge. And we heard that response. We heard that early on. The city going, this is the county's responsibility. And we're from the county. Well, look, here's what this contract's, this is the city's responsibility.
That wasn't nearly the same situation for medical, for emergency stuff.
Not at all.
HFD. I mean, they're basically boxed out of being on the inside of that.
That's a great point.
We know they had, what did they have? They had some inspectors, right, Robert?
Well, you had inspectors that have to be, that's part of the permitting process.
Right.
Where was the medical personnel?
But
they were outside.
So let's say this. We have an event. We have a huge event at NRG next week. Does this interlocal agreement make it any safer?
Is this a 90-day wait period, or is this?
They said it's supposed to be up and running with the 90-day. Everything's operational within 90 days.
This event is next April.
Okay.
Are we in a better position?
First of all, I get nervous to answer it, say yes, and then something doesn't happen. But yes, when you look at it now, there is finally a clear set of, okay, you're in charge of this, you're in charge of this, you're going to do this, you're going to do that.
There's still nebulous language in there.
I was going to say, is it clear what would the fire department do?
There are openings.
Well, the fire department's role in the interlocal, is that, well, I mean, that part kind of seems clear, but I don't know about the mechanisms that will enable it all to happen, because I don't think the underlying ordinances that we need or agreements are in place. So it says that the chief or somebody that the chief wants to do the job has the right to basically review, approve, reject, or clarify a medical plan for the event to the capacity. And that's where I have the question is, so he's approving, disproving, changing, but there is no certificate of occupancy for an outdoor event that's issued. So how are you establishing capacity limits in that case? If there's no mechanism for the certificate of occupancy, then how are you getting that job done?
Because you talked to the chief about that.
And he ran me in circles on it.
Well, and the other thing that when we were talking with one
point, and then we've got a question.
All right, one city official yesterday was telling me, because we were pushing back and saying, hey, and this person was telling me in a phone call, and they said, well, the way it looks in terms of the event, because there's event build out, there's a Susan Christian role, there's Sam Pena, HFD's role, and then there's Chief Finner's role. And the event build out, or the event director, they look at the build out of the entire event. How does this look? Is this going to fit with us? Is this going to work? They sign off, done. Then they go to public health, right? The safety of the individuals who are going to be there. That goes to Chief Pena, HFD, and then at the end of the day, it's security. But you also have public safety when it comes to HPD, that they have the responsibility. So the way it's been conveyed to me is that it goes to Christian, then it goes to Pena, and ultimately at the end of the day, it's going to be Chief Finner who has the final sign off on it to make sure
security.
to make sure. But it's him that can also, as well as Pena, that can say, you know what, we're not comfortable. One thing they did make clear.
And Lori Christensen can look at the layout, the ingress and egress now.
And
the
say
fire
that's
marshal.
not going to work.
They said they did make this clear from the city's vantage point. We are going to be working with promoters to make sure that everything's in place the way it works, because if not, it's not going to go off.
All right, so that sounds good. Let's take this question. We've got a question that just was texted into us from an anonymous person here in Houston. They ask, why weren't concert goers stopped right after they crashed the gates? I mean, we all saw that video.
That's the $64,000 question that everybody, it's like at that point, you had lost somewhat of your perimeter control.
Forget concert goers. Why is the concert still going on? I mean, why did it still happen after that?
So knowing now that there was no sort of permitting process, who could have stopped it at that point? The promoters, the event organizers, who had the authority in that?
Cops would certainly have the authority to arrest those individuals.
Right.
And
if there were enough of them
processing.
there to
You
catch
actually
them.
had a commander in charge of doing just that.
Right.
On site that day, their number one goal was to process.
This is minute one, by the way, of this festival.
And it was to process anybody who trespassed, arrest them, and get them processed. That was the entire task for this particular commander within HPD. And then keep in mind, I mean, I want to go back in time for a second. There were issues in the other festivals with the past with people jumping in to this festival. But then we didn't have the amount of crowd rush that we saw in this last festival at 8 o'clock in the morning, whatever time it was that the gates opened. But boom, you saw, it almost looked like, the running.
What, 11 a.m.?
Yeah, we have the log right here.
Yeah.
It was like within 2 minutes of them opening. Yeah, let's see.
Do we know, and while he's looking at that, do we know how many people were actually arrested there? Did we ever get any of that information back on?
I didn't look at that.
No, what I'm thinking about, I'm trying to play back an interview in my head, and I don't want to say the number out. I would say it's more than dozens.
9:15 HPD preparing to open gates. 9:23 participants have breached main gate.
There we go.
But again, they were being processed right there on site. It was a quick thing. They were being processed right there on site.
You had you had little other problems continuing throughout the deal. And so if you can't control your ingress and your egress, that's already going to be a problem, because this is also.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and the one thing I do want to go back to about the interlocal, one of the things that they also went through was streamlining the permitting process. And this came up because one of the things that I got was the draft of the interlocal. So you get to see where everybody's going, well, I don't like this, or what about this? And one of the things that came out is like, hey, it was kind of confusing because during past Astroworld events, it wasn't really clear who signed off on these permits. So now they've created a system where everything goes through Susan Christian's office. Now, they'll still, fire, police, health department will still approve
Reminding
those permits.
us who Susan Christian is.
She is the director of the Mayor's Office of Special Events.
Right.
But then, now everybody will be on the same page as to exactly what permits have been requested, what permits have been approved, so you know what's out there.
And I think, in going back to the issues with the concert safety, we have to make it clear that we have asked Troy Finner to sit down with us and answer some of these questions with us. And when I asked him, the only time he sat down was back in April. He said, Maura, I'm only going to talk about this for 30 seconds. It's under investigation. We're doing everything we can to get to the bottom of this. And that's it. He hasn't really been addressing a lot of these questions that obviously happened on his watch in the fourth largest city in America that resulted in the deaths of 10 individuals.
Well, there are
more than a year
liability
ago.
concerns there for the city.
For him admitting or saying certain things. Let's get to another question that just came in. Did the max occupancy at the venue align with the amount of ticket holders?
There was no max occupancy limit.
Yeah.
There was no limit. And the saying goes that there is no certificate of occupancy issued for outdoor events. Certificate of occupancy sets the ceiling, the limit of people that can be in a space, like when you walk into a restaurant.
And there were no seats. This was these were all standing room only.
It was a 2-day festival, too.
And that's the other part.
We still don't know how many people were there.
And that's the other reason that these plans are so crucial and sign off, because when you have what's called festival seating or standing room type of events, as you'll hear from our crowd crush expert in a little while, Paul Wertheimer, it creates an atmosphere of competition, because theoretically every ticket is a front row center stage ticket. And so, because everybody wants to get there, everybody wants to be right there at that moment when the main act takes the stage. Whereas in a regular, like a concert arena, you have accessible seating. It doesn't matter if you get there an hour late or an hour early. Your seat is your seat.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So we did interview, and you just talked about that, an expert on crowd management who has worked to change safety standards across the country. Coming up, Paul Wertheimer will join us to answer your questions. And before we go to this break, we do want you to text the word Astroworld. The phone number is on your screen. It's 866-996-5772. You can text your question to 866-996-5772. Once you text that word to the number, you'll be able to follow up with your question or your comments. We're going to take a quick break, and hopefully we'll get to more of your questions when we come back. Welcome back to our discussion, Astroworld, the next chapter. We're here taking your questions, and we did just get another question from a viewer who's watching. They want to know, did any families get justice, and did they get paid? This is an anonymous question. We've been following up on some of those lawsuits.
We know there's been settlements, but they're all non-disclosures.
Yeah,
So
that's part and parcel with these sorts of settlements is that you don't get to talk about it, and money buys a lot of things, including silence.
We do know that a lot of high-profile attorneys, not only in our city, but in other cities who obviously retain teams here in Houston and in other parts of Texas, were involved in this case. We do know that at least in terms of Busby's case, Tony Busby, the attorney here in town, he had 2 individuals. They settled, and we know that there's been hundreds of other cases that have settled. But again, it all comes down to what is called the NDA, the non-disclosure agreement.
Right.
The agreement is made, no one knows. And the question about justice, well, it depends, because if a family is saying, well, wait to see where the justice is, but maybe they closed this chapter, which is a difficult chapter to close. They close that, but they still want the justice, obviously, of what's going on with this investigation.
But here's the fear. Whenever these lawsuits start to get filed, and the one thing that comes out, and it was no different in this case, is we want change. We want change. You know, it's not just the money, it's we want to see change. Well, the problem then becomes when everything's under a non-disclosure agreement, you don't know if there's any real change.
Because a lot of those
system.
facts, you know, are sealed. And so when we've sought to sort of go out and speak with some of the families of some of the victims, we knew at one point they couldn't talk because it was tied up in court. And then a lot of those cases settled, some in July. And then now we don't know, does the family not want to talk? Can they not talk? Because you don't know how far that non-disclosure agreement, does it mean that they are barred from saying anything about their family members' involvement in the tragedy?
Well, typically they can talk, but they can't talk about the details of the settlement. They cannot disclose the details of the settlement. You guys can please.
And they can't say anything disparaging usually
about.
Right.
Sometimes.
Well,
I mean,
and sometimes there is an expiration date on the agreement, and sometimes there isn't. This says you can't.
But this is a lot of speculation. We just
So that's a lot of speculation to say. We know that some lawsuits have been settled. We know that some families, well, we believe some families have been paid, but there's a lot you don't know.
You know, we're all parents, and when you ask that question, and it's a good question, you know, did the families get justice? I lost my child. There would be no justice at the end of the day. No matter what happens, there would be no justice, because you look at this and you're saying, my child paid money to go to a concert. They're supposed to be safe in these kind of environments. You're not supposed to end up dead.
Right.
We all worked with him, John Barone, photojournalist, who's since retired. John always had one of the most brilliant questions I've ever heard in my career when you would interview the family of someone who had a loved one who was lost at something like an Astroworld. And he would always ask, and I always let him ask it because he was so good at this, what does justice look like to you? And the reason for that is because justice is different for every single individual.
Right.
I think for the greater good, though, the number one job is to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, and that the right mechanisms are in place so it doesn't. And do you think we're there? I don't.
Right.
Well, that's one of those things we'll have to wait and see for the next really massive event.
There's one person that knows the answer who's with us right now, though.
Paul Wertheimer, do we want to go to Paul Wertheimer? We do have another question. Wertheimer, I'm sorry. We're still working on getting him, but in the meantime, Gretchen from Houston just texted us a comment. She wrote that she has never received her refund from Live Nation. She tried contacting them multiple times and nothing. Not sure what to do now.
Are they entitled to a refund?
Well, I do believe, and actually that now that has been so far removed, I do believe that they did say something in the days after that there would be.
But it was tied, there was something that there would be refunds, and I'm sorry, Gretchen,
Not
we apologize. We have to go back and look
specifics, but we can
specifically,
get 'em.
because it did come back, and we can put that online, our answer, but there was something, but there was certain things tied to it in all that. I don't know, so we'll have to go back and look at that. But there was mention of refunds at some point.
I don't recall that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Paul Wertheimer, he is ready to talk to us. We want to make clear, like, communication, he can't necessarily hear what we're saying, but we do have one of our producers, Jason, who's kind of relaying some of our questions to him. So if it seems a little clunky, that's why.
Okay.
But we thank him for joining us right now. He has been involved
Thank you
in
for
sort
joining
of
us.
crowd control for a very long time, dating back like 33 years.
Yeah, back to 1979. You know, Paul, if you want to explain how you got started in all of this, when I visited with you in Los Angeles, I see your just absolutely amazing amount of research that you've been doing over the decades. Explain how you got involved in crowd management and crowd control.
I got involved in crowd management on December 3rd, 1979, following the deaths of 11 concertgoers trying to get into Riverfront Coliseum in Cincinnati to see The Who. At that point, as a public information officer for the city manager appointed me as chief of staff of a citizen task force to make recommendations to prevent a recurrence of that tragedy.
Okay. When you heard about the Astroworld tragedy, I remember one of the things that you said is that you were stunned that something like this was still happening in 2021 at that point. You know, that decades after the work that you and the task force did in Cincinnati, you still had this type of event.
Kind of here we go again. And I learned a few of the facts. It was just making the same mistakes over and over again as far as managing the crowd and protecting people in the crowd.
Then talk a little bit about some of those mistakes that you saw that were made, that you were surprised that they were being made.
We're not to have a proper plan, and the failure of public safety in making sure there was a proper plan. It was a festival seating standing room event. Festival seating standing room is the most dangerous crowd configuration in live entertainment. Special precautions are needed. Special precautions would have been needed for Travis Scott, who was an artist, not the first artist, but an artist who revs up the crowd. And if you rev it up too much, it's going to spin out of control. And then you see there was a failure to manage crowd density. There was a failure to observe what was going on and stop the show in time to protect the people in the crowd.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Paul, how do you effectively manage crowd density? How is that done? How can you achieve that goal?
How do you achieve it?
It's very simple. You only allow so many people in a particular space. If it's standing room environment, it might be, depending on the entertainment, might be 7 square feet per person. So you reduce the density. We learned this in Cincinnati, that festival seating was problematic because it forces people in a crowd to work against each other. Mm-hmm. In crowd safety, you want people in a crowd to work together for the common good of the crowd. The reason it forces people to work against each other is because everybody perceives that they have a right to the same space in front of the stage. And promoters take advantage of festival seating. It's easier to sell tickets and oversell an event.
I wanted to ask one question about timing. There was a lot of time in between the gates opening and Travis Scott, the main act, taking the stage. Does that play a factor in crowd management when you have a lot of time in between?
It doesn't play a factor if the crowd is managed properly. Even a Travis Scott show should be able to come off with minimal or no injuries at all. I mean, look, it's a live entertainment event. It's a music event. Why is anyone getting injured, let alone dying, going to a hip hop or rock concert. It's outrageous, especially in the 21st century, knowing what we know.
Paul, and looking back and considering the amount of injuries early on that morning, how alarmed were you that they actually let the concert go off that night?
It should have stopped before there were really significant injuries. If there had been competent people observing the crowd, they would have seen that problems were brewing. When the crowd got denser and denser and crowd surging first began, there was a time they could have stopped the show, and that's before Travis Scott ever put his foot on the stage. But then we've learned since that show that there was no capacity limit for the show. So we have an overcrowded problem. And I'll tell you, if you don't have capacity limits, then how can you plan properly for the event? Proper security, proper exits, proper space, proper emergency medical. You can't have a safe concert when you can allow the whole town to come to the show.
Right. And as a parent with children, I know small children, and all of us have them. We'll be teenagers before you know it. I think that's a huge takeaway. Standing room only concerts are the most dangerous.
With unlimited ticket sales.
Right, with unlimited ticket sales. But
right?
You have
I mean, that's what it was.
But Paul, I remember, Paul, when I met with you, one of the things that you had developed over the years were techniques for concert goers, especially those going into what are considered high energy standing room events. Go over some of the techniques and the warning signs that you've developed so people can maybe be aware for the next similar event.
That create this type of event.
Warning signs of danger to people in crowds and standing room environments. First and foremost is density. Now I've spent 30 years in crowds like Astroworld, so I'm not just talking about it from an academic point of view. I'm talking about it from someone who's in the crowd for hours. First, it starts with density, and people will put up with a lot of density because at first it's not a problem. There's a lot of camaraderie. Then it continues with crowd surges. So you're pressed up against somebody. Now you're being forced by pressure behind, to the side, even in front of you, knocking you around. And then people begin to, in the crowd, have anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and also people try to leave at that point. Those people who have the opportunity and recognize what's going on. But most people don't. And this is what you have to understand about crowds. People spend a lot of money, more than $300 to go to Astroworld. You finally get a place. The last thing you want to do as a music fan is leave. And you shouldn't have to leave. But the last thing, especially with young people, is to leave. Adults have a different view of risk and danger than young people. That's especially young men. That's why they make terrible drivers but great soldiers, because their view of risk is different. So it's not a matter of telling everyone you should know. You don't know, and you don't want to leave. And if you pay $300, for sure you don't want to leave, to see the event.
But
so that's why crowd management is so critical. Somebody observing the crowd, recognizing the dangers. At Astroworld, nobody recognized the danger.
But Paul, I understand also that you have some practical tips. I'm sorry, we have that delay there. But can you talk a little bit about the practical tips? For example, if you find yourself in a large crowd and you fall, I mean, you even have some things that people can do in a situation like that to sort of lessen your risk or of injury.
Well, I'll give you some examples, but I want you to know that a 16-year-old girl or a 15-year-old boy is not a crowd manager, not a security guard, not a police officer and not a fire marshal. They're just a fan. And really all they have to do is make sure they don't do anything intentionally that puts themselves in danger or other people. That aside, they should be very conscious of the density of when it gets dangerous and they're being pressed against other people. They should certainly follow their instincts, their biological instincts, if they feel they're in danger. They shouldn't have to leave their place, but sometimes it's wise to do it. I even do it when I'm in crowds, when I think I'm going to be overwhelmed. But I'm a crowd expert. I'm a crowd management expert. I'm not there really to see the act, but they should be aware of the crowd surge, a crowd crush, being pressed against other people, losing control of their ambulatory ability to stand in one space and worry about dehydration. Those are the kind of things that they should be aware of. And also what other people are doing around them, what condition they're in as well.
Paul, if somebody
falls, is there a position they can take to try and minimize the risk of that compression asphyxia, like what happened to those at Astroworld?
Fans around them will try to pick them up if they can, if the crowd is static and if there's enough space. That's usually what happens. Everybody lends a hand to pull somebody up as soon as possible. But if you can't get up and people begin to fall on top of you, a crowd collapse, you want to try to locate yourself on the left side of your body. You don't want to lay flat on your stomach or your back, because if people fall on top of you, they'll compress your chest and you won't be able to breathe at all. That's a potential fatality. If you lie on your side, preferably your left, but your right will do if you have no choice, you give your lungs some space. Now, you might have broken ribs, but really you're buying time to survive because you'll still be able to inhale and exhale. So curl up if you can, protect your head if you can, and lie on your side till hopefully somebody can pull you out of the situation or you can get out of it yourself.
What a line, buying time to survive at a concert.
And don't scream. You say it's very important. A lot of people, the reaction is to scream, don't scream.
It's a good position to be. On your side in a fetal position, protecting your head and your lungs as best you can.
Paul, let's go back to Cincinnati very quickly. We still have questions here in Houston 13 months later with no concrete answers. How long did it take Cincinnati until everybody had the right answers there?
Well, a task force was set up within 5 days out of the city manager's office. A task force, I want you to know, with no parties who had conflicts of interest, like the Governor Abbott's task force or Mayor Turner's task force. I just want to say this too. The task force also included a high school student and a college student, male and female. It should always be the case. Few people know more about crowds than people that are in them and what to do to make them better. City Council in Cincinnati started passing ordinances within 5 days. 5 days.
Wow.
Not 6 months, not a year, an agreement of 2.5 pages that takes a year like the city county did. 5 days they acted on behalf of young people. The task force itself took about 7 months. And remember, the task force produced the first guidance in America used to make live entertainment events and other similar events safe. We produced 70 recommendations, 70 specific recommendations, not generalities. And we had an addendum of 70 pages or so. The report itself was 70 pages as well. It was a significant model for all America, was well received, and for some reason, the task force, the governor's task force and didn't even acknowledge that it existed. And I understand that because it was too detailed. It actually called for changes. Cincinnati adopted most of them. Since 1980, when it was released, they've never had a death in Cincinnati or serious concert injury.
Oh. Paul Wertheimer, we appreciate your insight and talking with us tonight and all the work that you've done over the last more than 3 decades. Thank you so much. We will be right back with more of your questions. We hope you'll stay with us. Welcome back to our discussion, Astroworld, the next chapter, here with our KPRC 2 Investigates team. We've got another question that just came in. This one is interesting because we've had a ton of large-scale events here in Houston. I mean, we're a big city. We got the rodeo. This person wants to know, how is the rodeo handled? Because, yes, it uses NRG and the grounds of NRG. So
city's on the ground floor of that one, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, and the rodeo
in the county. Also the
city,
county.
But I mean, the way it's been explained to me is that event truly is collaborative.
Just because of the history of it?
Yeah, and that the planning for that, first of all, it's an event they've
been doing
got
for
down
decades.
the road. I'm sure that changes a little every year, but everybody knows to get together and what needs to get done for that. And there's not an issue of being kept out of meetings. That's how I understand it. You guys, is that how you guys get it?
Right, and it's in a set deal every year. We're going to have the rodeo. We know how to do this. We're all together on the planning. We're all together on how we're going to do this. Whereas, like some of these concerts that come in, up until now, you kind of let right, but they largely relied on the promoter to do what is right. I mean, it's the promoter's job to have a safe event. And then, Paul always asks the question, well, that's great, but then when that doesn't happen, who steps in to save the kids?
And I will say that they use a lot of law enforcement from various sectors of the region.
For the rodeo.
For the rodeo. They come in as EJOs, extra job officers, which wasn't necessarily the case with Astroworld, in which it was a challenge to get EJOs because they had to raise the hourly rate for Astroworld. Rodeo's different. People want to work it. They enjoy seeing the smiles. They know what they're also getting, as Robert alluded to there. You know what is going to happen for the most part, what to expect.
Right.
And you also have to take into account the type of event you had. We spoke to this Dr. Matt Minson, who's an expert on disaster response, disaster medicine. And one of the things he said is, if you have 50,000 people show up to a Boston Pops concert, you're not going to have the same issues as 50,000 people who show up to a heavy metal concert or a hip hop concert or any other kind of what they call real high energy event. So all of that really has to be taken into account when you plan for this. You can't plan for this 50,000 event in the exact same way you plan for that 50,000 event.
It's not Simon and Garfunkel in Central Park.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So we have another question.
Wow, that's an old reference.
It says,
but that's what everyone thought.
Right. Travis Scott is planning to host 2 events next year at Minute Maid Park. It is the first event he's hosted since the tragedy, so they want to know, what is the city doing to make this event run smoothly?
Well, 2 different events. First off, this is a baseball tournament. So it's a baseball game inside of Minute Maid Park.
We're aware of this event,
thus far. So
it's not a concert, not a music event.
It's a charity event, my understanding, right?
I believe so. We've seen
charity
some of
event
this
tied to baseball tournament involving several local universities as well. Not several universities, one local, Texas Southern, as well as others. Southern University will be there as well.
With his foundation,
With
Cactus
his foundation,
Jack.
Cactus Jack.
Has he had any concerts?
Private shows.
Private shows.
Little pop-ups.
There was going to be one in Las Vegas.
Right? Vegas, right? That got canceled.
Right, but I think the whole show, it was part of a festival or something, right? Or maybe it was just him. But yeah, I remember that.
Then he was going to play Santiago in November. I forgot how that went in Chile, and then he had London as another venue.
Right.
But the one in Vegas was canceled for Labor Day weekend.
So he has had some international, some shows in other countries. We've got another question. So Mr. Goodman from Sugarland asks, has anyone faced any consequences in the aftermath of this deadly festival? That's a very good question.
That's an excellent question.
No charges, right? Do we have any charges?
Nothing criminal.
The investigation's not over with yet, according to the Chief Finner.
So nothing criminal in terms of anybody facing the music. We do know that there's been some other changes within the department, but nothing with regards to people held accountable in accordance with the law.
Right.
And I
Criminal
wouldn't hold my
charges
breath
and-
on that.
Yeah.
Or any fines.
But here's the deal. I mean, you gentlemen and Amy can correct me if I'm wrong. And you're studying this. Prior to this, is there even a mechanism to hold anybody accountable for the way, because the way it was set up, the way the planning went, was there even really a mechanism in place? I didn't see one that's like absolute, like you just complete dereliction of duty. I didn't see anything like that in terms of this event.
I think it's hard to make that argument considering the fact that you did have officials from the county and the city so deeply involved there, meaning HPD, right? So they were there and they're like, well, you guys saw this. Why didn't, that's the argument that would be made.
On that note,
Right.
and people who were held accountable. I mean, you've been working and following up on stories about HPD officers who were there. That it now looks like they are being held.
100. So I spoke to Commander Mark Lentini, and he was there that night as an extra job officer. Again, I kind of touched on this a few moments ago, that you did have several members of the department work this as an EJO, and the original starting salary was about $35, jumped up to $65 because they needed to get officers, but no one really wanted to work this. Lentini ended up working there. He said he was doing it for a friend of his.
Why? Why did they have trouble getting officers to work?
It was just
It's a madhouse. They know it's a madhouse going in.
They knew that it was challenging going in, that they knew that they've had problems in the past, and frankly, they didn't want to work it for those reasons.
And so these officers who did take those jobs, you've sort of followed up. Tell us a little bit about your latest story.
So in the last report that we had on Monday night, we had, there were some other officers. I wouldn't just say officers. These were assistant chiefs at the time.
High ranking.
Yes. You had Darren Edwards, assistant chief. You had Belinda Knoll at the time, who was an assistant chief, and Mark Lentini, who was a commander. Spoke with Lentini on camera about this. He felt that he was a scapegoat because, as we do have some sound, we're going to hear from him in a moment. But we also attempted to reach out to Edwards and Knoll. They would not, couldn't get them on the record with us. I did speak with the union.
Did they get shuffled?
They became commanders. They were demoted.
Which is lower.
Which is lower. And they received a pay cut because you're getting demoted. You're losing that pay, too, from assistant chief
But
to
was it
commanders.
ever officially tied to the Astroworld event?
So when I spoke to the union president, Doug Griffith, about that, he did make those comments saying that in those two cases, he believes it was tied to Astroworld directly. Again, only Lentini and Griffith.
But even that's a gray area.
And
I
no
mean, that's
transparency
amazing.
from the
Even
government.
that's a gray area.
From HPD, no transparency on that.
Because if they were demoted, what is it that HPD,
But you have to remember something. Chief Finner is granted the power to demote or promote anybody into the assistant chief position because those positions serve at will within HPD.
Oh, true. That's how they couch that.
Correct. They don't have the department protection, meaning the union. However, the union president did come out and indicate, with regards to Edwards, from my gathered, he got demoted. He believes it's because of Astroworld. And with regards to Knoll, from what he's heard from the other situations she's conveyed to the union, it's because of Astroworld.
But that's why I go back to the answer to that question we just had. I never really even saw the mechanism that was there to go, okay, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, you didn't do this, so this is the consequence to this, this, and this. And it was all, they couldn't even, it took them until May to finally say, okay, the city's going to have jurisdiction over this area. Yeah.
And we have sound from Mark Lentini. He's the gentleman we interviewed. Let's hear what Mark had to say with regards to the issues from what happened at Astroworld.
Well, ended my career, and it was a poorly planned disaster, obviously. We wouldn't be talking about it, but from the get-go, everybody knew it was going to be a bad deal. For me, I feel I was scapegoated a little bit, and I understand the anger for the families for sure.
Yeah, so he's basically the only one who will speak out and say, I feel like this is the reason
retired,
why.
right?
Yeah, he's left the department. He retired. He took his retirement. He left the department, which is why he went on camera with us. We do know that Knoll and Edwards are still with the department, so it makes it a little bit more challenging for them to sit down and have a conversation with us. But with regards to Lentini and his position, because we talked about this with him, he was approximately 300 to 400 yards away from the actual issues that took place on that night where the deadly surge took place. He was in charge of processing trespassers who attempted to get in, arresting them and processing them. That's what he was in charge of. And we do know that some assistant chiefs from HPD were not there that night. They were over at the Police Gala Foundation because they had to be there because it was the biggest night for the Police Gala Foundation. And it was an event in which you have some of the highest donors, some of the closest friends to the department. And you obviously want to have a meeting and you want to show your face at that event, but then you also had some people who were at
But they're
Astroworld
working
and had
extra
questions.
jobs, correct? These are all
Not
extra jobs?
everybody.
Was Lentini an extra job?
Lentini was an EJO. And you had others there that were, you had assistant chiefs that were EJO officers there that
I mean, that
night as
is
well.
just my confusion. And it's, again, this was speculation because we don't know.
But they still, let me rephrase, they still report to HPD in these kind of situations.
Yeah.
And they are covered by the union if there's any issues.
Yeah.
And it's still, I mean, you're an officer, you're a police officer
Yeah.
24/7 is my understanding, is the way,
Right.
you know, it is. But I mean, this also goes back to, it just seems like so much was put on the promoter and the producer. And to a certain extent, I get that. They know their business better than anybody. They should know how to plan. The city has requisites. You need to make sure you have this handled, that handled, you know, that kind of stuff. But when so much is put on, that when things do go south, that nobody's really sure what to do, other than the HFD paramedics who just knew to rush in and try and start saving people.
Seriously.
You know, everybody else was kind of this, that, and the other. And one of the things when I interviewed the Harris County Fire Marshal, Lori Christensen, one of the things that she was very happy about is, you know, show stop authority. You hear the chief, Finner, Chief Pena talk about show stop authority. You know, if we're uncomfortable with show stop authority. And I asked, and she was very happy about that because she said that'll extrapolate out to other
She's saying,
functions.
I have the authority
right,
to
law
say,
enforcement. Law enforcement.
Yeah.
Now she's saying that, and I asked, I said, didn't you always have that? I mean, as a law enforcement officer, don't you have the authority to stop something that you feel is unsafe
Right.
to the public? And her answer was like, well, sometimes it helps to have things in writing.
Exactly.
And it's like, really? You know, and I'm not, you know, picking on her for that, but I mean, it's like, that was surprising to me. That was a gray area.
I know, but my question is, okay, so fine. So would have somebody have stopped that show?
Oh, not that night. I don't think anybody knew how to.
All the way back, do we remember that in the very few days, like right after this tragedy, we learned that Chief Finner did visit Travis Scott?
In the afternoon. And what he, and everything from...
In the afternoon of the festival before he went on stage.
Right. And the conversation from what I have learned and what took place there was basically, hey, have a great show. We know there could be some issues here. In the past, we've seen just keep it clean tonight, keep it clean. So in terms of make sure we don't have any major because you have to remember something. Travis Scott had this history, and Paul alluded to this, where there had been issues at shows in the past. You had one in New York City, a couple of others, in which he really gets that crowd energized. Not to mention, this was the first major concert in our city post-pandemic. I think you had a lot of people that had been inside of their homes or hadn't been to a concert in 2 years, and they're like, boom, here's our moment. I just want to just go have fun for the first time. I want to enjoy this. And then that energy picked up. And you really hear this a lot, but it was almost like a perfect storm in terms of all of these components coming together that resulted in this deadly tragedy.
But a perfect storm kind of implies that it all just, these kind of things just kind of convert. There were so many warning signs prior to.
Yes, true. Right.
That's where the questions come in. It's like, why didn't somebody have this overseer role that we apparently now have, this unified command that's supposed to be on site during big events to monitor this, to go, hey,
does the interlocal lay that out? Does the interlocal clearly lay that out?
It does. It talks about the unified command.
The Unified Command Center now has a member of HPD inside, HFD in the command center.
But is it always calling for unified command?
For the 6,000 and above. Remember, these are the events at Energy that are 6,000 and above.
3.5 of the agreement reads as follows. For every event where the event security plan calls for a unified
exactly.
center.
That's nebulous. That is nebulous, where it calls for. Who's calling for it? When will we have unified command? What are the conditions? That's the kind of language that's all throughout that.
When I asked Susan Christian that directly, it was 6,000 and above. And Lori Christensen, that's her understanding, the Harris County Fire Marshal. I asked that. I understand what you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing with you. But that was the specific question. All this applies to 6,000 and above.
That's wiggly language. That is not button-down language. I don't think.
We've got another question.
Okay,
all
sorry.
Right. So no, Jason from Harris County, he sent in a comment, which is interesting because we've discussed some of this already. Jason said, says everyone is pointing fingers and there's no accountability. There should have been no permits issued for the show. Let's break some of this down a bit more on how the permitting process will work now.
Well, I mean, they had the permits. It's hard to say because
like fire. What kind of permits?
Pyrotechnics.
Right, they had
but there's also
permits
food.
Tent.
Food, tent. Yes.
I mean, Jason,
yes.
clearly the permits that they did have were not things that would have covered any of this crowd surge or how many people
But the
went
way,
in.
the way
Yeah.
it's going to start.
They were BSC permits.
Right. It's going to start with the director of special events for the city, as well as for the county, her counterpart, and they're going to start saying, "Let's see your layout." That's where it's going to be step one. Let's see what the layout's going to look like. And that's going to be the step one now moving forward for the permitting process.
And everybody is going to have to know what permits are being applied
Then it goes
for
back in
and
the
which are
agreement.
being approved.
Who says, Astroworld happens again, who says you can only have 50,000 people? I mean, would we all not agree that you have to set a ceiling on how many people could be in that space?
You know, I spoke to some officials. I spoke to one particular official during this investigation who said, listen, it can happen again like that under the right circumstances. Even if you do everything right, it could happen like that.
But this doesn't even set a
and I'm not
limit.
saying specifically here in Houston, it's just because of the dynamics of the crowd overtaking.
But not if you talk to Paul Wertheimer that there's proper crowd. It's crowd management and it's crowd maintenance. Maintenance implies regular, ongoing, keep going. Like that young man that I interviewed, he couldn't even sit down. And that was before Travis Scott ever took the stage. That's the crowd maintenance. You come in, hey, everybody's a little too tight. Everybody needs to spread out a little bit. Have it partitioned off differently instead of this massive big area. That's that.
For Jason and for me, let's answer this. So this interlocal agreement that we're discussing, he's saying, so right now, if some big entertainer wants to come to Houston and they say, hey, I want to have an event, we're selling tickets, it's standing room only, this interlocal agreement says they have to go to who and ask for a permit, for permission.
It's still going to be the city. It's the city. The city still has on NRG. Remember, let's make sure.
And Jason, this interlocal agreement, you should understand, is only dealing with events on NRG property.
Of events also 6,000 and above.
6,000 and above. There is something else
at NRG.
At NRG.
Only NRG.
Yes.
There is another ordinance. Are we calling it Chapter 35 an ordinance?
25. It was the code. But that has nothing to do with this. Is that one that's on private property. But let's answer questions first, though. They still will have to go. Now, they've streamlined the permitting process. Instead of everybody being in their own silos, doing their thing, like health does this permit, fire does this permit, special events does this permit, and nobody's really talking to make sure that everything's meshing. Now everything will have to funnel through Susan Christian's office, again, Director of Special Events. The respective departments will have to approve or reject those permits, but everybody, this new unified command now, the way it's supposed to work is everybody from the beginning will see every permit that is being issued to make sure everything is there and works
the person
together.
signing off at the end of the day will be the chief of HFD, the
chief of
director for the city in terms of special events, and the chief for HPD, where you didn't have those requirements in the past.
Right.
I think it's just pretty loosey-goosey on the language.
And I hate this, but we're going to have to see when we have the next 6,000 6,000 above high energy event.
I mean, it's just really broad strokes.
They will argue.
Yeah. I mean, we don't necessarily have to wait to see. So basically, this interlocal agreement has been passed and takes effect in 90 days. Is that the case?
In terms of, I'm talking about wait and see exactly how this all works.
When the rubber hits the road.
When the rubber hits the road. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, as far as the new one, that's a separate deal. That's the private land deal that we talked about earlier.
So let's talk about that. And I know that we don't have to get too into the weeds, but it's important because not every huge event is going to happen at NRG. I mean, there are plenty of private, or concerts on a private piece of property that is not owned by the city or the county, and there are rules for that. Is this new?
Yeah, well, what they did is they amended it to where if you're going to have a music event that's outside, has to be outside, because if it's inside, occupancy codes already regulate that. So if it's outside and it's 500 and above, you have to go through essentially the same drill. You're going to have to get permits, you're going to have to get plans approved, all of that, because if you don't, then they can come in and immediately shut you down, and it allows the city to recoup, this interlocal does the same thing, but this also too, to recoup emergency-related costs if you do not follow these plans or follow.
Not only recoup, but it's setting up a revenue stream.
Yeah.
It is. Because it's setting up a whole series of permits and stuff. And I mean,
and officials
the
have to be
second
there.
paragraph is, here's how much this is going to cost you. I mean, I guess
emergency
I'm jaded
planning,
on it.
emergency planning to some degree would cost
Yes.
some amount of money, and
Right.
then to make sure that you have extra staffing in locations.
So you don't pull,
on
and the argument here is that you don't pull that staffing from other locations in the city, right?
right.
Because you suddenly have this emergency that takes place on private property, then you know what? This portion of the city is going to lose
coverage.
Right, at that time.
According to Susan Christian, there's roughly 2,000 special events a year
Emergencies are
in the
always on
cities
private
in the city of
they're
Houston.
saying-
So the concern is you have these events that are planned, they're already right, and then suddenly you have this event out here that boom, 1,000 people show up, it starts going bad, and all these police and firefighters and paramedics have to race to it. It puts a real strain on services. Now, I don't know,
Agreed.
did you ever talk about that with Marty Langton?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And they're saying
that's
the
what it was.
amendment to this is to address that these kind of pop-up concerts
But again,
that get out of hand.
And you look at it, they addressed that in October at this committee hearing. They originally were going to talk about it in September. It got pushed back to October, and then they come out with this and just got passed. But they already were talking about this in October, but yet we still didn't hear about this until November.
And we haven't even touched on the federal or the state level. You know, I mean, you had the governor's task force,
Right.
you had the House Oversight Committee send this really scary letter. We demand this information.
And all of these things are all in their own little bubbles instead of everyone just coming together and saying.
I just checked on it again. I mean, in December of 2021, the House Oversight Committee sends this really sternly worded letter to Live Nation. We want to see all the information related to Astroworld by January 7th. We want to have a briefing by January 12th, all that. I've just checked. I can't get any of them to call me back except for Congressman Al Green, who's not actually on the Oversight Committee, but he signed the letter that was sent. And all he would say is he does not feel that enough was done. So he's now asking the Justice Department to open an investigation. But we're now more a year out, and you still can't even give specific answers like, did you get the information? Did you have the briefing? I mean, it's amazing.
And we will
It's also government.
Well, it's been an incredible amount of time on that. But as we were getting close to the documentary being pushed out and streamed for the first time at the 1-year anniversary of the tragedy, it was like we still have all these open records requests and public information requests pending. From the city and all these government agencies that they're just sitting on them, and it is 12 months later, and they're still saying we're considering them. I mean,
well, and no, a lot of them have been denied outright because of active. I mean, that's the blanket denial
because the investigation is ongoing.
Right, an ongoing investigation.
So, we want to close this out sort of the same way that we started in remembering the victims and the 12 people who lost their lives at the Astroworld tragedy.
10.
I'm sorry, 10 victims. And a lot of the victims' families and friends have started charities and things to make sure that, their loved ones are remembered and that there might be change out of this.
Well, the one that I got a chance to know was Madison Dubisky, and her family has started the Pink Bows Foundation. Madison was a young lady who was very involved in charitable works and everything like that. The family is involved in lawsuits, so they can't speak, but I spoke to the president of the Pink Bows Foundation, Peter Remington, who did speak on behalf of the family, and one thing that he talked about was just how much charity work this young lady had done in her very young life.
Madison had over 500 hours of charitable work during high school, right? And that's a lot. I mean, most people in their lifetime don't give you 500 hours. So we have a junior committee that goes out and raises funds and doing donations for scholarships and for cancer research. We'll be donating to children's hospitals and so forth, and it works out pretty well.
That's honoring Madison's legacy, but one of the main goals of the Pink Bows Foundation is pushing for legislation to make concerts safer. They want a third-party overseer, somebody who will be a third party, completely independent of any revenue stream to the event, to check safety plans, all of that, and have show-stop authority. And they're also working now with promoters and events to create what they call safe spaces. They have these tents that they've designed, pink bows on them, that will create these safe spaces within crowds, so if people do feel overwhelmed, they have a place that they can go. They'll water, some attention, somebody to talk to, kind of calm themselves down. So that's a lot that they're working on.
Well, there were 10 people who lost their lives, and that includes Brianna Rodriguez and Madison. So the youngest was just 9 years old, Ezra Blunt, who was at the concert with his father, John Hilbert, just 14 years old, and Barty Shahani, Axel Acosta, Franco Patino, Rudy Pena, Jacob Jurnek, and Mirza Beg. So we want to turn our attention now to our documentary. After this discussion that we've had here, we're going to show that documentary in full again. And, you know, just to remind people that we are continuing to answer your questions. We're continuing to ask those questions.
Right.
And so we want you to send us your questions throughout the documentary. We'll be online answering as many of them as we can at click2houston.com. And we want to continue this discussion for the city of Houston, for Harris County, for everyone who wants to send their child or wants to attend a concert, a large gathering like this, to make sure that the next one is safe.
Right. That's the important part.
Right.